earlier this week, a week that has felt like a whole year, like everything else about 2020, right? But as we all sat in anticipation about this election, I participated in a post-election prayer service with the pastors at Bethlehem, and Jen Vickerman was there with me as our singer, making space for our prayer in the songs. And one of the songs that she sang echoed the words of Julian of Norwich, who coincidentally is this rather amazing woman who lived during the time of the Black Death. It went from 1348 to 1350, so 2 years, and may have killed either a third to a half of the people in the city of Norwich, where she was from. Julian became an anchorite, which means she, for religious reasons, withdrew from secular society to lead a prayer-oriented or Eucharist, communion-oriented or meditative-oriented life, kind of reclusive, but it was a little different because it was within the city. A ceremony would have taken place that was kind of a death rite for her life in the world, and then she would have walked through this door that was built next to the chancel area in a sanctuary. And once she walked in, the door was walled shut, and she would remain there for the rest of her life by choice. She was there for a long time. This might sound strange, but if in your early life, when you're like 6 years old, there's a plague where most of the people, or like half the people, are dying all around you, then and then that pandemic, once it was subsided for a little bit, would resurface over the years in various ways, I'm sure creating some trauma for people. While self-isolation might not seem so bad, basically she went into quarantine. Some of us know about that. The pandemic we are living in right now is not nearly as deadly as the Black Plague was, and so even though we have, say 5,000 people testing positive every day in the state of Minnesota, and by the way, I had to change that number last night because it was 4,000 earlier this week, and now we've grown that much in just a few days. That's how fast it's growing. But in any case, it's easier in this time and place to ignore this pandemic, decide it's not a big deal. But if you lost half your city and there's no way to remain untouched in that, there are apparently a lot of religious recluses that came out of that time, about 200 during the 1300s, though she remains the most famous. I would guess the plague played a large part of that. So Julian goes into this isolation for life. Well, sort of. There would have been a window that looked into the sanctuary and a window that looked out into the city, and people could come and talk to her and get wise counsel from her. And then there was, some kind of small door like you see in jails for that chamber pot and for her to get food. She was a mystic, which literally that word or mysticism means shutting the eyes and the mouth in order to experience mystery. The mystics were people who claimed experiences of union with a divine being. And many of them have written some things down. A lot of it's pretty confusing for those of us who haven't had that kind of experience. From her cell inside of that church, she wrote a book called The Revelations of Divine Love. She was, in fact, the first known book written in English by a woman, Breaking Glass Ceilings. In this book, she records a series of visions that she had during a serious illness when she believes that she will die. So they are maybe fever dreams. But in her, perhaps fever dreams, she has shown spiritual truths through these visions that she has around the Passion of Christ, and they are very strange to read. Don't try to read the Old English version for sure, but she speaks of seeing blood flow out of the crucifix and cover the whole world in that blood, which for her was a sign that spoke of God's omnibenevolence and love in terms of joy and compassion in the midst of plagues and uprisings. Joy and compassion. Through what looks like a bloody mess to me, she gives a message of optimism based on certainty of being loved by God. And not just her, she's not the only one loved by God. She wrote that God sees us as perfect and waits for the day when human souls mature so that evil and sin will no longer hinder us. God is nearer to us than our own souls, she wrote. Her most famous words are ones that you will know that she received in her visions as Jesus answering her. In the end of that book, it says, "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." She heard these words said to her in these visions. She says, "This was said so tenderly, without blame of any kind towards me or anybody else." These words are so famous that they are on a piece of art that sits normally across from me in the front gallery at Squirrel House that Spidey created earlier this summer in the wake of George Floyd's murder and subsequent unrest in our city. I'm not sure where that piece of art is today. I was hoping for it. But my guess is, as Spidey's been working on art all summer, it has been evolving and morphing with the things that happen. So probably that's the piece that she took to keep on working on. I don't know. Maybe she'll tell us in the chat section. One of the things that I love about this piece of art is that it's hard to make out the words in the piece of art. They kind of blend into all the rest that is going on in the piece, which is true of a few of the things that she's made that appear in this gallery. Actually, one of them quotes another song that we sang today, and you can see if you look closely at it, the words "be still." So I'm loving that piece today too. So you can, when you're looking at the piece, you can just barely see the "all will be well" that sort of comes out when you're looking at it in the right way. Or as the Grateful Dead would say, once in a while you get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right. But back to Jan Vickerman, singing during this prayer service, during our week of waiting that we just lived through. She sang a song that echoed Julian's words, and then she reflected on those words later in a post on Facebook that said, "Yesterday I sang a song for a prayer service inviting us to all find peace in the chaos. And one of the songs was the words of Julian of Norwich that said, 'All will be well, and all manner of things will be well.'" She continues, "Friends, I am struggling with this sentiment this morning. My faith in God is strong. That is not the question. The question is, how will all be well? How do we move forward as a country? There are fundamental issues of human rights that are tearing us apart. And these are not issues we can just agree to disagree on. Our country has changed. Our country has to change." I think the other one is true too, and probably Jen would support me on that. Hate has to leave, and true love for our neighbor must be our normal. True love for the neighbor, not tolerance. How do we get there? Because we must. Yes, we must. So now to address the crazy story of the bridegroom in the Bible that Maria read earlier. As one of my favorite commentators, Debbie Thomas, said about this story, "I've never liked the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. When I first heard it as a child, I annoyed my Sunday school teacher by asking all of the wrong questions in response. Why do the bridesmaids have to bring their own light to a wedding reception? Why are the bridesmaids stingy and mean, the wise ones? And why does the groom show up for his own wedding with such at midnight? And why does the bride, whoever she is, put up with such a ridiculous delay? And where even is the bride during this story? And why, after keeping his poor bridesmaids waiting for hours and hours, does the groom blame them for lateness and shut his door in their faces?" And those difficult questions make it a little harder to wrap a nice message from this parable. But parables, we know, must change over time, like so many of our texts, and say different things to us at different times. So here are some of the message it may say to us today. My friend Krista Compton, who's also a pastor, says this year when she reads these words, she's not inclined to talk about the end of the world, but noticing how vividly the bridesmaids illustrate one of the challenges at the heart of our common life. We live in a competitive world where we are assuming scarcity, and that's also true of the bridesmaids, both the ones who leave to go buy more oil, assuming that their lack of oil will make them unworthy, and the ones who brought extra and are ready and prepared and did everything right, except that they don't share. I'm not sure what it will take for those of us who claim Christianity, like I do, to live fully into the abundance of God, but it is clear that our assumptions about scarcity are killing us. We see resources as finite when some people have more lamp oil, more food, more money, more access to water, then others must necessarily have less oil, less food, less money. And somehow, both in the story of the bridegrooms and in our lives, we believe and speak of those who have oil and food and money and access as successful people who did all the right things and earned their spot in the world. And conversely, that those who run out of oil in the biblical story, or those who run out of anything in our world, have failed, aren't prepared, are foolish, without paying any attention to what systems have been in place for centuries to block someone's access to oil, or economic structures that have allowed a few people to hoard tremendous amounts of oil or food or water or money while others go without. Our country has been tragically creative in finding ways to drain the oil from the lamps of the marginalized groups and then blaming those people when they are left without light. Both sets of bridesmaids, the ones who leave to go buy more oil, deciding that if they have no light, they aren't good enough, and the ones who hoard the oil they have are living in this mindset where some people are good and righteous because they are ready and others are foolish. But if the allegedly wise bridesmaid had taken a moment to offer up the oil they had, then this story would have had a much different ending. To share that light is also ushering in God's way. And we have work to do. Even now, lots of people's daily lives are still painful, regardless of who is our next president. People's lives are at stake still today. We don't have to wait for Christ to come to live into God's promises. We have some agency in that, and we have some tools and we have some lessons from Christ's life about what that world looks like when it is on earth as it is in heaven, and that is our work to do. But there is a lot at stake here. There is a lot going on to despair over, even as your choice for president may have won. That does not solve all of our problems. As Jen says in her post, how will we all be well? We will do our work, I hope, and continue living in this time, which is now more than 2020 years after Christ came the first time, and we're still waiting, like fools maybe. How will all be well? I don't know the answer to that, but let us keep working on whatever it looks like for us to share oil for the lamps that light the way. And when the day is done, may we rest with Julian's visions, written in a time of death and disease and unrest, that showed a blanket of love that covers the world and heard a tender voice that blames no one, saying, all shall be well. All shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Amen.